Welcome to the CanMed Coffee Talk podcast, where we talk with the leading minds in cannabis science, medicine, cultivation, and safety testing. I am your host, Ben Amaralt. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager at Medicinal Genomics. I'm a proud member of the team that puts on the CanMed Innovation and Investment Summit. Well, if you check out cannmed-events.com, you may notice that things look a little bit different. We have updated the site to include the dates and location for CanMed 25, which will take place June 17th through the 20th at the Wyndham Resort in Rio Grande, Puerto Rico. We are really excited about next year's event, which will include all the great cannabis science, medicine, and innovation content you've come to expect from CanMed, with ample opportunities for collaboration and networking as well. We will be adding more details to the site in the coming weeks and months, so be sure to sign up for email alerts and receive all of those announcements. We have also added the CanMed 24 presentation videos to the CanMed archive at cannmed-events.com, so be sure to check those out as well. My guest today is Dr. Debra Kimless. Deb has been in the medical cannabis field since 2013, where her diverse involvement spans many areas, including cannabis cultivation, processing, formulation, testing, patient care, and conducting research. She consults within the industry as an advisor for companies who are interested in novel formulations specific to medical conditions. She develops protocols, obtains IRB approval, conducts clinical trials, and helps publish the results. At CanMed 24, Deb presented a poster that shared data from an open-label clinical trial investigating the use of a cannabinoid-enhanced topical cream to alleviate symptoms of restless leg syndrome. RLS is a condition that affects up to 10% of the U.S. population, including Deb herself. She found relief using a CBDA-based topical cream and is working with the product manufacturer to conduct clinical trials that demonstrate its effectiveness. During our conversation, we discuss the symptoms of RLS and possible causes, Deb's own struggles with the condition, why many conventional and pharmaceutical treatments for RLS fall short, why CBDA appears to be an effective treatment, why a transdermal approach is better than ingesting or inhaling cannabinoids, and Deb shares results from that open-label clinical trial, including some pretty remarkable success stories. Before we get to my conversation with Deb, I'd like to thank this episode's sponsor, Trusted Canna Nurse. Trusted Canna Nurse was founded by Megan Bang and Ariane Williams, two nurses who are dedicated to bridging the gap between traditional medicine and the world of cannabis and psychedelics. They specialize in creating evidence-based treatment plans for all ages that address chronic illnesses, treatment-resistant conditions, mental health, autism, and more. Learn more at trustedcannanurse.com. Okay, and without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Deb Kimless. Good morning, Deb. Thanks so much for joining us on the podcast yet again.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Of course. All right. So I'm excited to talk with you today about Restless Leg Syndrome. You had a poster at CanMed 24 that presented data from an open label clinical trial that looked at using a cannabinoid-enhanced topical cream for alleviating restless leg syndrome, which I know we're going to dive into. But before we do that, I was hoping, could you tell us a bit about your background and how you became interested in investigating using cannabis to treat restless leg syndrome?
Okay, so it's a long story. Back in 2013, I entered into the cannabis space by just being really inquisitive, learning about medical cannabis as a method of treating a whole host of diseases and medical conditions. through this process, I had myself in many different touch points, including an owner-operator of a company that cultivated and processed cannabis products for patients in the medical market, as well as guiding patients in the treatment and use of cannabis for whatever conditions they're struggling with. And now I've sort of evolved into conducting research for companies whose passion is to rise above the fray and distinguish themselves by actually looking at a particular method of administration or form factor and applying it to a certain disease process and seeing if it works or not. And so that's how I got into the cannabis space, and that's sort of my 11-year journey. But the reason why I chose Restless Leg is because I have it.
Oh, wow.
And so I've had it now since 2006, and it's a weird, strange condition. And I've, subsequently learned that actually it's a pretty common
Hmm.
neurologic condition affecting upwards of 15% of the general population, which is a pretty large number. And the issue is with it, like many disease processes, there's not one causative factor. Mine came on after my breast cancer surgery, and they actually treated me for with post-op pain meds for a prolonged period of time because I developed a neuropathic pain syndrome. And then I got off this med, and then I ended up with restless leg. And I've been trialed on a whole host of different pharmacologic therapeutics. And there are a bunch of different ones that are either off-label utilized or on-label utilized. And the different categories are anywhere from GABA analogs like gabapentin to dopaminergic type drugs to adenosine to even iron supplementation, because iron deficiency can also cause this. None of those improve my symptoms, and it was and has been incredibly annoying. The interesting thing about restless leg that's almost ubiquitous when you talk to people is that the treatment that is most efficacious is getting up and stretching your legs and walking around. Now, unfortunately, that disturbs your sleep. And that's the culprit issue here because now you're treating your restless leg, but you're sleep deprived. And
Hmm.
then your whole day is shot the next day because you're roaming around the house or stretching your leg or uh, moving around so much. Your partner, if you have one in the bed with you, is like also sleep deprived. And it's, so the whole household's disrupted.
So
And
how
so I
many
started,
how many
yeah,
times would you be getting up throughout the night?
like many times,
Yeah.
like many times. Like it's interesting because when you first go to sleep, you're fine, and then an hour you'll wake up, you'll stretch, you'll walk around, you'll go to the bathroom, you get a drink of water, you go back to bed, and you hope that this will go away, and then it doesn't. And even interestingly, when you utilize an oral ingestible form of cannabinoid, and I've
Hmm.
tried many, um, sadly, it didn't work really well. Or just like all of the other traditional pharmacotherapeutics, it didn't work reliably. So sometimes it would work, and maybe it was just out of sheer exhaustion that I would stay asleep, or maybe it did work, but not really. I couldn't say, well, this particular capsule or gummy or this or that. Okay, I'm fine, and I'm good to go.
Hmm.
So it became a thought experiment for me because I'm like, well, what's interesting is even though it's a neurologic issue, and there's been studies looking at central neurologic issues, so in the cerebrum, spinal cord issues, peripheral nerve, um, what's ubiquitous and consistent is that people get up and stretch and move around. And so that's a peripheral mechanoreceptor.
Hmm.
And we've got a whole bunch of different kinds of mechanoreceptors in our body. Mechanoreceptors are these little receptors in our body that allows us to feel temperature changes, proprioception. So if you close your eyes and you're standing, you don't fall on your nose. Your body's able to adjust to where it is um, without having you fall. and vibration. So these are the special types of receptors that do this. But here, if I stretch, it kind of feels good slash hurts, and then I'm able to go back to sleep. And I'm like, well, what if we block the mechanoreceptors peripherally, not centrally? I wonder if that would work. And then how would we do that? So I tried lots of different topical over-the-counter stuff. They've got over-the-counter NSAIDs. They've got, over-the-counter magnesiums. They've got over-the-counter menthols, camphor, castor oil. None of that seemed to work. And so I started thinking about CBDA because CBDA is a very potent anti-inflammatory baseline. We know that. We know that it works on a whole host of different types of receptors, not CB1 or CB2, cannabinoid 1 or 2 receptors that are either central or peripheral, but other kinds. And I started researching that it actually works on TRPA1 receptors and these piezo receptors, and they seem to be intimately involved in stretch receptors. And so I'm like, I wonder if that would work. And I applied a special formulation of CBDA, and I'll get into that in a little bit, onto my legs. And for the first time in almost 20 years, I was able to sleep through the night. And I was
Years.
blown away. So I called the owner of the company, the PhD scientist that formulated this particular iteration, and said, let's run this clinical trial because this is my experience.
Wow. And now, can you describe what the symptoms feel like? So is it just like you have an urge to move your legs?
This unbelievable, intense urge, a pressure, and I don't want to say cramp because some people do get cramps. I did not experience that. It's just this intense squeezy pressure that you just have to get up and do toe lifts and just stretch out. For me, it's my calves. Other people have other manifestations. Some people have it in their entire leg. Some people have restless leg, even though it's a misnomer for them, in their arms, where they just have to get up and just stretch their arms all the time. I met up with one patient who wore out the sheets on the bottom of her bed from continually stretching, like literal holes in her sheets.
No, and you mentioned that the relief is in a lot of cases getting up, moving, stretching. I have to imagine that for older people or maybe people who aren't as mobile, that's not really an option. So that must be difficult.
Well, then what happens, like sometimes when I'm super exhausted, I just flex and extend my feet to stretch my calves.
Mm.
But as you aptly put, I mean, one, that's not 100% efficacious. And two, as an older person, if they're on any other medications or they have mobility issues or stability issues, or just waking up from a sound sleep, you get disoriented, could lead to falls or other injury. So, and you're exhausted. I mean, you're literally, super sleep deprived.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
did I understand correctly when you were kind of investigating different treatments for this? It wasn't so much like stimulating that stretch or mimicking sort of that stimulation of the stretch receptors. It's actually blocking those.
Well, I think the goal of the traditional therapeutic is to try to block from either central spinal cord conduction.
Hmm.
So they're working on GABA and dopamine and those types of things, or iron. For some reason, you see a lot of pregnant women who complain of restless leg during pregnancy. But interestingly, even after you correct for their iron deficiency, oftentimes their restless leg still remains. So I don't know if it's true and unrelated or truly causative. Nobody really has defined it, and there's not a lot of research out there on this. But anytime you take a centrally acting pharmaceutical, there are centrally acting adverse effects, including, somnolence, balance issues, a whole host of other side effects, which
Yeah.
I prefer, and I'm very sensitive to all kinds of pharmaceuticals. So the idea of a topically applied therapy to me made sense.
Yeah. So now is is the idea with those other therapeutics, you're sort of trying to block that signal from the legs to the brain saying like we need to move and
No, it's
kind
the
of
other
try to
way.
cut that
It's
off. Oh,
it's blocking some kind of aberrant signal from the brain transmitted peripherally.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's the other way. It's
Start,
top down.
right. Start stopping that. Here, we're just trying to block whatever's being aberrantly transmitted because that's what it is. It's weird wrong signals. Not unlike neuropathic pain, which is you no longer have a pain. There's nothing causing your pain, but yet you still have it.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. So
So
so what is it about cannabis or, CBDA that kind of makes it an effective treatment here?
So THC, THCA, CBD, CBDA, all of the cannabinoids work on many different types of receptors, including the TRPA1s. The nice thing about CBD and CBDA is that, at least for now, in the current legal landscape, you don't have to jump through as many hoops as you would if you were going to experiment or use THC or even THCA at this point. So you're walking a fine line. The second thing about this particular formulation of CBDA is that it's about 75% CBDA, about 5% CBD. So we're working with both of those, but it's formulated in a way that is very special. It's complexed with a metal called magnesium, and it is formulated so that it has both um, hydrophilicity, it likes water, and lipophilicity, it likes fat, and it allows for penetration through our skin, which makes it available to the deeper tissue, the deeper receptors within the dermis, which is where these mechanoreceptors reside.
Mm.
So I didn't experiment with just CBDA or just CBD. Actually, regular CBD I've tried and didn't work, but just CBDA without this special formulation to see if it would work or not. I would probably venture to say probably not as well, because this particular formulation from this company, that's their secret sauce. It allows for this dermal penetration of these cannabinoids to allow it to work. It's magic.
And the topical application, like you said before, better than oral because it's more localized or
Well, when it's more localized, it's more bioavailable.
Hmm.
So anytime you ingest
Sure.
anything,
Yeah.
it goes through the metabolic process. And so even if you have X amount of milligrams of whatever cannabinoid, once it goes through that digestive process and gets metabolized, you've got a lesser amount available. Plus, it's distributed throughout your entire body. And here it's local to the area where your mechanoreceptors are peripherally that you're trying to block.
Right. So same with then with inhalation, you'd be bypassing the digestive, but again, like you said, it'd be distributed throughout the whole body and not be
Ex-
as effective.
Exactly. And then with CBDA, because I believe that that is way more efficacious than CBD, if you're heating it as an inhalation, either through smoking or vaporizing, you're converting it.
Right.
So the amount of CBDA you're getting is much less than what is being applied and available topically. So that's a challenge. So unless they create a vaporizer of CBDA, that maintains that, so it's a cold vapor or a method of inhaling. But again, you'd have to worry about that volume of distribution within our body.
Hmm.
It's hard. And again, how wonderful and accessible is it that you are applying it locally? The adverse effects are de minimis. I'm guessing, and I'll discuss the small trial that we conducted. But nobody had any issue. I guess the only thing that I could think of would be a skin irritation from any of the excipients from the, from the shea butter that is the base, which is pretty neutral.
Yeah. So yeah, let's get into sort of the results from the trial.
So knowing what I just said, the bioavailability, the topical application, the penetration of this, I'm like, well, I can't be the only one that, is experiencing this. And one other thing, remember, we're not, unfortunately, not curing anything,
Right.
because those aberrant signals continue. I'm sort of hopeful that maybe if I continue to block them peripherally, maybe, that signal, that circus signaling will go away, but thus far it hasn't, for me at least. And for the 10 people I've trialed it on. So I put out actually on social media, hey, anybody with restless leg, give me a buzz. I've got this topical application that may work for you. And so I received a bunch of different people who contacted me. And the premise is that there is an international restless leg syndrome validated questionnaire. There's 11 questions. Plus I did a patient's global impression of change, which looks at quality of life pre and post treatment. And we used those two measurements real quick just to see if how people responded. And again, you either know it or you don't know it. It's not like you have to build this up to see if it works. Although I did run the trial for 2 weeks just to see what other people's experiences would be. So we had on the RLS validated questionnaire, you had to have a restless leg score of a 7 or greater. So out of a scale of 0 to 10. And that was the minimum inclusion criteria for you to have that to come in. You
So
could actually still be on a pharmacologic therapeutic, because if you're 7 or greater, clearly it's not working.
mm.
Yeah, I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
So what are some of those questions?
So how often do you get up? How long have you had this for? How much does it disrupt your evening? How much does it disrupt your day the following day? How much does it disrupt your ability to live your life? I mean, it's pretty significant stuff. How often do you get up? How long do these sessions last? So in a 24-hour period, are you up and running around at night, for 3 hours, 4 hours?
Wow.
Yeah.
So those people are really struggling.
Yes, we are. I mean, it sounds like, oh, restless leg, no big deal. It's actually very disruptive.
Yeah, I
Um,
can remember the first time I heard about it. I mean, I don't know. It must have been like a late night infomercial type of therapeutic, and I was like, restless leg, what even is that?
right,
But since I've heard others struggling with it, my grandmother towards the end of her life was starting to struggle with that as well, and that's what made me think of, I mean, she wasn't the most mobile, so that must have been really difficult for her
right.
if the urge is to get up and start moving.
I can't even imagine. It's almost like having an itch you can't scratch. How
Yeah.
crazy that must be. I'm lucky I can get up and move around, and I can't even imagine somebody who is bedridden and, or reduced mobility and doesn't have the ability to at least try to solve the problem. It must be insanely frustrating
Mm.
and disruptive. So 10 people, the average the average, struggle for restless leg was like 8+ on these people. So they met and exceeded that issue, the 7 or greater. And we trialed them for 2 weeks. And then I gave the questionnaires again. And then also the PGIC, which is at the end, comparing how you feel today versus how you felt before the clinical trial began. And I mean, the statistical significance was insane. Now, our N was small. The number of people I recruited were only 10. The reason was it costs money to run clinical trials and to give out free medication and to, make these things and get a statistician to do this. I mean, and this is a small company funding this. Um, it was Everybody responded. There were two people that didn't have statistical significance. They had a reduction, but not statistical significance. Everybody else had an insane reduction in their restless leg. In fact, there's a woman who is a musician and she could never perform sitting down. Her restless leg occurred 24/7,
Oh, wow.
not just at night. She could never sit and watch television. She could never sit and go to a movie or a play or a concert. And when you saw her perform, and I've seen her perform, she, would roam the stage while singing and perform and playing guitar or ukulele or banjo or whatever else she was playing. I mean, it was awful. And this particular topical has been transformative for her.
Wow.
It has taken her from a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being the worst you can ever be, to a 0. And she's not the only one, but she is, the most vociferous about screaming from the rooftops how incredible this treatment has been for her, how life affirming and life changing, because she was getting depressed. She was going to neurologist after neurologist after neurologist, trying a whole host of medicines that just either knocked her out or made her feel even more depressed or suicidal, and had to get off all of these other crazy medicines, which, by the way, made her depressed or somnolent, but didn't take care of the restless leg. Just made her even more sleepy than she was before from being sleep deprived.
Do you get all
And
this, all the drawbacks of the side effects and not the benefits of the effects?
exactly. And this is a story that I heard from the other 9 patients. In fact, every single person that was on a medicine got off it once they started after the 2-week trial, when they were like, oh my God, this cream really works. They've all weaned themselves off it.
Wow. And so how is it, just one application before bed and you're good, or?
So everybody's different and everybody's symptoms are different. The beauty of this is that the systemic uptake of this, even though it does penetrate dermally, the systemic uptake is a de minimis. So you don't have to worry about, cytochrome P450 issues, or, worrying about other medications that you're taking and the metabolism thereof. So what I recommend to people is apply 30 to 45 minutes before bed, rub it in really well to the affected areas. Again, some people had restless leg, but it was just their knees. Some people had restless feet syndrome. It was just their feet. Mine is just it's just my calves and no other part of my leg. So rub that area, the affected area. I always tell them less is more. So, because if you're layering it on thick, you're just wasting, the topical. So you put on until you rub it in really well and go to bed. And in the case of this woman that I spoke about, like whenever she wanted to watch a TV show or a movie or a concert, put it on right before you do it, and then she was fine.
Wow.
And she was able to watch television. She was able to like binge watch Netflix, which she has never seated, which she's never been able to do.
Yeah, because
Which
before she
during
would be
COVID must
pacing.
have been frustrating.
Yeah, because before she would be just pacing the living room.
Pacing, getting up, moving around. Yeah, it's exhausting. I mean, this poor woman was really struggling. So some people, myself included, some nights, and I don't know why, get up, 3, 4 in the morning, and you feel a little bit, and I say reapply. And so I keep my little jar, on the countertop in the bathroom. And if I have to in the middle of the night, if I, use the bathroom, get up, put a little bit more on my hand, massage my leg, and go back to bed. And it works.
And so now you mentioned this isn't your product or anything. It's
No,
one that you found. Was it developed for this purpose, or was it something that you kind of lucked into?
no, it's something, again, that I just started thinking about. CBDA is an amazing molecule.
Yeah.
CBDA is anything, there's a song, anything you can do, I can do better. Anything CBD can do, I believe CBDA can do better. And so it is a way better anti-inflammatory. It is specific on COX-2 as opposed to COX-1 and 2, which CBD does both. COX-2 is mostly, inflammation, which as a pain reliever is fabulous.
Hmm.
And so this was originally developed for pain relief, for topical pain relief, better than Voltaren, better than steroid. And because of its anti-inflammatory nature, I put it on mosquito bites, rashes, you know, any type of like sunburn. It's incredible.
Sunburn even.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it works beautifully. But because of my restless leg and my continued research into understanding how all of the cannabinoid molecules work, because I constantly am researching this. When I bumped into an article that talked about mechanoreceptors, which I was, looking at, which cannabinoids interact with mechanoreceptors, because a stretch receptor is a mechanoreceptor. I've got restless leg, and that's how that was the rabbit hole I jumped down. And then I'm like, CBDA, I know this company because I use their products for patients for pain relief. Because I love CBDA. I think it's fabulous. And this particular formulation penetrates.
Right.
So I've got people who've got low back pain from musculoskeletal issues and all kinds of stuff. And I give it to them for that. And it works beautifully. So now I'm like, well, let's think about restless leg as a therapeutic for this, indication. And it worked. I mean, it worked on me. And then I did a quickie trial. And so the goal now is to publish this, hopefully get some money from, either anyone out there who's listening who wants to participate and expand this clinical trial, and or the NIH, which we will be applying for grants. But it's interesting, you just can't apply for a grant with a big idea. You have to actually show some proof of concept, some inkling that it would work. So go figure, the government wants to be responsible at this point. So here I think now we at least have a signal
Right.
that there's an N of 11, me and 10 other people, where it actually worked. So, it would, once we publish it, we'll be able to then make application and expand it to a larger number of participants to see if it truly works. Because I can't put my nickel down and go, see, it works, it's efficacious, I'm done, because
Right.
it's just 10 people.
Right. Yeah.
But 10 diverse people of different ages and backgrounds and geolocations, along the US, but still, it's only 10.
Yeah. And I would imagine different sort of manifestations of symptoms too, right? You had that one example of the woman who was sort of experiencing it all day, and others who might only at night or
Yeah.
things like that. So
And and that's the beauty of this. Like, think about it. So the cause of this is not really well characterized and multifactorial. The symptoms of it certainly multifactorial, and when people struggle with it, and yet blocking at the periphery. And this thus far is the only therapeutic I've seen specifically targeting at the periphery. Think about, then you can, who cares what the etiology is? I'm blocking it at the end organ where the manifestation is, and it works.
No, and you mentioned too that if I heard you correctly, it sort of started happening after you had treatment for your breast cancer. Now, is there usually sort of like a trigger or sort of an event in people's lives where that comes on?
It could be. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not an uncommon thing. So after my breast cancer, I ended up with neuropathic pain. They tried me on a whole host of different medications, last of which was a drug that they use like water now called tramadol. So tramadol was initially developed thinking it was just sitting on a opiate receptor, the mu1 receptor, as a pain reliever, but didn't cause respiratory depression or cardiac issues because it had a sealing effect. even if you escalated it.
Hmm.
That's how it was billed in the mid 2000s. Subsequently, they learned that this medication also sits on GABA receptors and serotonin receptors. And so when you get off it, you're getting off of three different receptors.
Hmm.
And when you peel back that layer after being on a drug for a period of time, serotonin receptors, GABA receptors, those are the ones that are targeted therapeutic for restless leg. And here I did something to those receptors, I believe, taking that medicine that led me to this restless leg. I would imagine if I got back on tramadol, which I would never do, but I'm imagining if I did, my restless leg symptoms may go away.
Oh, interesting.
But I don't want to be on that drug.
Right.
Right. And that's why, if you think of what I said earlier, the GABA receptor, the serotonin receptor, the dopamine receptors, all of those are what the pharmaceutical companies are targeting as a systemic drug.
Right.
So I suppressed those receptors with the medicine, thinking I was helping myself. I was recognizing my neuropathic pain wasn't going away. It took a year for me to withdraw from this med. It was awful.
Wow.
And I was left with restless leg.
Wow. And now the neuropathic pain, is that something that you're treating with
I
cannabis as
treat with
well?
CBDA.
There you
I
go.
keep that cream going, and so I use it topically, and it helps alleviate it dramatically.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, Deb, before I kind of get into like the closing part, sorry, I just hit my microphone. I know you mentioned that you have kind of geeky science notes and stuff like that. I want to make sure that we kind of touch on that stuff.
No, I think we did. The
Okay.
geeky science was the mechanoreceptors, the piezo receptors that when so the name of the magic sauce is CBDA, but they call it chylobinoid. And chylobinoid is this mixture of CBDA, CBD coordinated with magnesium to make it amphoteric, or amphophilisic, which means it absorbs through in water. It can also absorb in fat, the lipid layers, which allows for this penetration. It looks specifically at these membranes. So interestingly enough, you don't have to sit directly on a receptor in order for a receptor to be changed. You can change the membrane within which the receptor is seated. So change that conformation or that shape of that membrane.
Hmm.
And therefore it changes the ability of that receptor to respond properly. And I liken it to this. You're in a pool and you're hanging out on a floaty thing, an inner tube.
Okay.
And picture the inner tube to be that, like that receptor. And you're like something hanging on that receptor. And then you've got this guy on the diving board that just does a cannonball. And it causes this huge wave. Now, he didn't hit me, but he caused a huge change in the water that bounces me off that tube. That's kind of how CBDA regarding the peripheral piezoreceptors and some of the other mechanoreceptors work. It's not sitting directly on that receptor that we know of yet. Again, we have so much more research to really parse out, but the hypothesis is that we're changing this sort of conformation of the membrane, which in turn is changing the receptor's ability to receive these signals.
Wow.
So that's my geeky hypothesis.
I like that. That's a nice analogy. All right, Deb. So winding down here, I wanted to kind of just ask you what advice you'd give someone who's maybe considering using cannabis as a treatment for restless leg.
So I would say go on to a website called chylorelief.com. And Chylo is CHYLO, relief, RELIEF.com. And try it. Get a small bottle. Use the lavender, and I like the lavender one because it smells good. It smells like
Mhm.
lavender as opposed to cannabinoids. Some people are put off by the scent of the plant. By the way, this is a an extract from the plant, from the plant as it grows in nature. These are not cannabinoids synthetically derived.
Oh, interesting.
So for the purists out there, just know that, there's some terpenes, so it does have a cannabinoid-y smell. Lavender, it also has linalool in it, which is a terpene, and I'm all about, the entourage effect. So now you've got CBDA, CBD, you've got other terpenes in it, plus it's supplemented with lavender, which has linalool, which is a no muscle relaxant as well. And try it. And you can use CanMed 20 in the coupon code and get 20% off for any of you listeners out there that want to try it.
Oh,
And then
excellent.
I would ask to reach out to me. And if you want to put my email into, the chat or whatever, what people listen to, reach out to me and let me know how you make out. I would love, love, love to use, all of the information from other people's experiences as an observational study.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll definitely put those links in the show description so people can easily find it. Is there any other sort of resources or resources available that we might be able to point people to if they're interested in learning more?
So on the Kylo Relief website, there is a blog section that goes in depth into the geeky science that I sort of described here regarding the receptors. We put up a white paper as to our hypothesis as to how it works. So that would be a good resource. And then I will share with you when the publication is out and published, and they can read the official publication. And then hopefully we'll get some money in and be able to continue to run these trials. And there's so many things we want to look at. I mean, so one, expanding our N, of course, and two, really parsing out our mechanism of action to prove what we hypothesize, which is it truly is a peripheral mechanoreceptor, probably either the TRPA1s or the PASOs or both. And how it works. And we've already been in conversation with a university that has a skin model that allows to examine translocation, and it looks at as well, it looks at, different receptors. So we just need funding for that.
Excellent. All right. Well, Deb, thanks so much again for doing this. I'm so glad to hear that you've gotten some relief from your condition and that you're helping others hopefully get some relief as well.
Thanks. And thanks for giving me this platform to share this knowledge, because it was great to present a poster at CanMed in Marco Island this past May. We got a huge amount of interest. People have been, purchasing it and reaching out to me and telling me how transformative it truly is. And which I'm, administering the IRLS, that validated questionnaire post, observation, because people know what they felt like and now they know what they do. And I will do that for anybody else that, wants to participate in this as well. But I'm just excited that this is now going to reach even further for people who are listening to this podcast, because the risk is low, the benefit potentially is great, and my passion is to try to heal the world. So one cannabinoid at a time.
Yeah, and it's great. Yeah, cannabis really is it's really proving to be a great therapeutic for sort of these sort of edge cases or sort of difficult to treat conditions. So it's a great thing.
Well, as Dr. Ethan Russo, my cousin, says, it's like a pharmacy in a plant.
Yeah,
And he's right. It's an efficient pharmacy in a plant.
absolutely. All right, Deb, thanks
All right.
again, and hope to
Thank
see you
you.
soon.
Appreciate it. Take care.